Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host, as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah! Alright, so here's how it's going to go. We're going to talk about how math is used in the MCU on a meta level, so more from an outside sort of perspective and how that impacts everything. And we're going to talk about math within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So more of what's going on within the worlds that we see in the stories that are unfolding. And yeah, so that's how that's going to go. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second, but just know there are going to be spoilers ahead. What kind of spoilers? You can assume all of the spoilers. If that doesn't bother you, please continue. If it does, please reconsider, because I don't want to spoil things for people who don't want things spoiled. So again, spoilers ahead, all the spoilers, massive spoilers, just go under that assumption. Okay, so with that being said, here we go. Okay, so let's start by talking about how it began. With the MCU, it started with Iron Man. You know, it just started with that one movie. And Disney had bought out Marvel at some point, and eventually they got to this point where they wanted to expand. They wanted to turn it into this ginormous thing that it did become. So we start with Iron Man. And then you get to the notion that, you know, there's other characters who have other movies. You have that old Incredible Hulk movie from back in the day. That's technically part of the MCU. So, you know, you started with one movie. You started with that, and then you went to two. But it gets so much more crazier than that, right? Because then they had phases. So, you know, there's math and just constructing everything. So they had their phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, Phase 3, and we are so far into it now that they're going to enter a fourth phase. Like, it's insane. But for a while, they talked about the three phases, right? And so there's math and how that's constructed, right? Like, they have a certain amount of movies that they bring out in those phases, and a certain amount of the story that they want to tell within those phases. And this is where I feel like it starts to get really interesting. So, you have your phases, you have your movies within those phases, but then it gets all sorts of crazy, all sorts of wonky, because you have the movies, right? But then you have the TV shows as well. And, you know, there'll be more of those over time. But there's also tie-in comics. There's also music associated with those movies, with those shows. And so you're having the MCU affect like different types of media over the years, and there's math in how everything is done, because in addition to the math involved in constructing the universe, there's math involved in the stories that you want to tell, right? Like, you have a certain amount of time in each movie, and you're spreading that out over years, you're spreading it out throughout the different phases, and you want to look into that and figure out just how much of the story that you want to tell with that. And then you have your budget, and not only do you have the amount of time that, you know, each movie will run, but you have all the time that you spent filming it, all the time that the cast and crew spent, the directors, the producers, all that, right? There's so much money in that, and you know there's math and money, and there's math in everything that the MCU is doing, right? So outside of movies themselves, let's talk about the shows for a second, because you have you know, something like Agents of Shield that ran for several years, that, you know, help promote things, help expand that universe. But let us not forget the Netflix shows like Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, Iron Fist, I guess, the Defenders. Yeah, I'm not a fan of Iron Fist if you couldn't tell. But the whole thing is, right, there's money in all that, because, right, TV is a different element. So you still have a certain amount of the story that you want to tell, and you want to like see how that fits into the larger story. Although with the Netflix shows, not as much, unfortunately. But they were so pivotal in everything. And, also like the Punishers in the mix there too. Let's not forget that. But anyway, so in addition to that, if you have something like Agents of Shield, it's less convoluted. If you have the Netflix shows, you know, Marvel, Disney, however you want to say it, they had a deal with them, right? And there's money in that, and how that all shapes up. And, and when you're looking at the TV shows as a whole, you know, how you divvy up your episodes, it will depend on what you're trying to do, but you have to consider the math in that. You have to consider the time in that, and the budget, just like the movies. And one thing that I do want to especially mention with the movies, because I can talk about all of them for days, but I want to bring up Black Panther. I want to bring that up for several reasons. One, it was a dope film, but two, it's my favorite MCU movie, as well as just one of my favorite movies, and it meant a lot to me outside of the movie. So I want to kind of talk about all of that while demonstrating my point with math and how it's being used within the MCU. So you have Black Panther, and at this point we're well into the MCU, and with that movie, there's so much that went on with it. So you have like the traditional stuff that we've been talking about, or rather just like the stuff that we've been talking about, where there's math being used in how you want to tell that story. There's math being used to film that story, and there's math in how it's being distributed. There's a budget to consider. There's all the math that goes into putting the cast and the crew together. Math in the effects, right? Math in how the music is implemented. There's math just all over the place with it, and it's beautiful to me. But it goes further than that, because we talked about math, and we talked about how there's math and money, right? But with that, it goes deeper to that, right? Because the numbers, the money, it means something to different people. And with Black Panther, it made over $1 billion. That's absolutely insane. And not only is that a large sum of money, but it's pivotal, because I know that Disney has been trying to become more diverse over the years, and I feel like that movie, helps, because they might have had plans for this or that, but I feel like it definitely helps to see that you could have more diversity and have that make a lot of money, and have that make more money than some of the other movies that you have been producing over the years. And they've all made a lot of money, but that was a big standout. And for me in particular, it was cool to see, because you had a predominantly black cast, and the director was black, and you had just so much awesome stuff in that movie. And even though the villain you know, went way too far, I think you cannot ignore where he was coming from. Rather, you can't ignore where he was coming from. He had solid motivation, and that stuck with me. Furthermore, I'm a consumer, and movies are expensive, and I'm an educator. I don't make a lot of money, so you got to consider what you're going to do with your money and your time as well. And so there's math and all that. And so when it came to Black Panther, I knew I wanted to see it, and I knew I wanted to see it with my family. And fortunately, I got treated to the movie. But that being said, we all wanted to see that, and there was money involved in us taking the time to see that, and there were so many people that were reserving tickets that we had to wait a little bit, and then we had to navigate very, very careful to not get spoilers. But we saw it, and for me, it was definitely money well spent. And as a black man in America, it hit me pretty hard in some spots. And I have those memories of seeing that with my family, and that's gonna stick with me. That being said, continuing to talk about the movie, there was some other things that came out of that too. So let's talk about the music. So there are two big, albums that came with that movie, and there's money and time that go into making those albums. But there's also a lot of math that, in addition to the time and the money part, goes into producing the said music, because there's math in how things are played, there's math in how they're put together, there's math just in all of that process, from the instrumentation to how everything is produced. There's math in it, even to like how it's distributed. And with those albums, you have the original score, which that was decent. There was a lot of decent songs on there, but for me, the big album to come out of that movie was Black Panther the album. I had to do a little build up for it, but let me put it to you this way. So it's about an hour, and in that hour you have 14 tracks, and with those 14 tracks, they range in quality from good being the lowest of the quality and mind blowing being the highest. My favorite song is Pray For Me, with All the Stars being a fairly close second. In either case, they are all pretty well produced songs, and there's math in all of it. And I think that's really cool. And so I've talked about how math is used in the meta sense, a lot. And I'm gonna switch to the universe part in a second, but I will also mention, like, so there were tie-in comics which I haven't read, but when you think about the MCU, a lot of the storylines come from comics, and I have a whole separate video on comics, like math and comics, and I'm gonna put a link for that in the description, as well as some other links that I think will be interesting that kind of support what I'm trying to say here. And just to say though, with comics, there's a lot of math in there too, both inverse and out. Sorry, both inside of the universes and outside of the universes. But just something that I did want to mention that was pretty cool with it, that I kind of go in depth with in another video, is just when you're looking at the comics, there's a lot that you can play around with when you're making the comics, because you have a certain amount of pages to tell the story, you have your panels, so you have a certain amount of things that you want to fit in those panels. And then there's the whole idea of you got to fit in your speech bubbles, you got to color everything, and you have to have it presentable, and you have to distribute it, and there's so much money inside of all that, like, it's insane. But that being said, I'm going to switch it over to how math is used inside of the universe. And this is how that's going to go. So I'm going to give an overview of how is used in some of the ways, but I won't go super in depth. And then I'm going to focus on math and how it involves Thanos in that universe, and how I have beef with his motivation, as well as how he went about things. And we're going to get into it. So let's talk about all of that I just mentioned. So, when I think about how math is used within the MCU, within universe, there's so many different ways you can go about it, because so you have everyone, and you have their powers or their tech, and they're all fighting a bunch of people. Now, as far as the tech goes, there's math in how someone affords that, of course, because of money, but there's math in how all that tech is developed. There's math in how it's implemented. You're dealing with engineering, you're dealing with physics, you're dealing with geometry. There's so much math in all that. And then, of course, you have, different people having different powers. And depending on how those powers are used, math is still going to be in all of it. Because, you're fighting this opponent or you're fighting that opponent. So a lot of times they're trying to do damage to this person or that person, so they have to have a good idea of how strong their opponent is, as well as themselves, and there's math in all of that. And they got to, if they're firing something, look at distance. Even if they're hitting someone, they got to look at distance. So there's a lot of physics and all of that, a lot of other crazy stuff in it, and math is throughout all of it. But even outside of the fighting, you have people like on Earth, for instance, using math like they would in everyday life. It's everywhere, because of course they're using it in school for various subjects, but it doesn't stop there, because of course with STEM, you're going to notice the math, right? Like, because it's in engineering. it's in physics, it's in chemistry, it's in biology, and you have a bunch of crazy scientists in the MCU, so you know they're using math all the time. But it hits you in the arts too. You can't get around that because you have people who are writing this or writing that, and there's a lot of math in writing, and you can't get around that. And the same with like more traditional art, like whenever someone has to draw a picture or they're making some sort of art, there's math in all of that, and I think that's pretty cool. And I feel like you could easily talk about math and how that's used throughout, but some of the videos that I just made with math in the world gives you an idea about how math is used in our world, and as a result, you can get a good idea about how they're using math in their world because a lot of stuff from us in our world comes into there, but they just got some wackier stuff going on. And then there's a lot of math in the space stuff, and whew, you could say so much about that. Um, Speaking of space, let's talk about Thanos and his insane journey throughout the Infinity Saga of the MCU, which is those three phases and everything that composes them, the movies, the shows, and all that good stuff. So with Thanos, he has the mission that we've heard from early on that he wants the Infinity Stones. He wants to collect all of them, and you have math in the amount of the Infinity Stones, and then you have math in him acquiring them from his travel to his planning and all that good stuff. And you can honestly say so much about that, but I want to focus in on his whole motivation behind that and his insane plan. So his motivation behind it is on his world. There was a resource shortage, and he warned them that they have to do something about it. But his solution to it is extreme. Is extreme. Eliminate half the population. Problem solved. They didn't listen, and things didn't go well for them. And throughout the years, he goes on to like do what he wanted to do there to several planets. So there's a lot of genocide, and his logic is like half the population means twice the resources. That's what I take away from that, which doesn't sound good. But even if it wasn't exactly twice, the idea is like, hey, if we cut the population by a certain amount, we're gonna get more resources for more people. Not only is that just like insane because he's killing a lot of people, but it just doesn't work out because here's the thing, like he thinks he's being logical about this, and okay, he is being logical, but it's not good logic because here's the thing: the problem isn't solved. You can't just like throw math at it and say we're done. It has context, and I think there's a lesson in that. You can do math all day, and you do math all day because everyone's a natural mathematician, and that's another story for another day. But we do math all the time, and what we do in the class is a reflection of that. But my whole thing is you can't just do the math and not consider the context. Because here's the thing: just because there are less people doesn't mean it works how you want. If you want to get crude with it, it's like, okay, so yes, in theory, there are more resources for more people. But how those resources are distributed is an entirely different thing. Because, okay, you have less people, and again, in theory, more resources for them. But you are going to get people who take those resources from others, or you're going to get it not distributed properly. And because of how Thanos did things with the snap, half the universe was randomly wiped out. And there's going to be people who did jobs that help people and that helped to manage resources or could help adjust with the situation. And that didn't go well. And he didn't think about any of that. And the thing is, he had all that power. He actually collected all of the Infinity Stones. He had the power to warp reality, control time, do all of this crazy stuff. He could have provided resources. He could have done so many more things than he did, but he went the simple route and killed half the universe. And he did the snap, which people are calling the blip in universe now, which I'm not okay with. But anyway, he did the whole thing, and there was a lot of fallout from that. And we had time travel shenanigans. We had multiverse shenanigans now, and there's math and all that. So this video is getting quite long, but I am hoping that through it, you see more of how math is being used inside and outside of the universe as far as the MCU is concerned. And I hope you found it informative, that you found it entertaining, that you got something out of it. I had fun with it personally. I can't wait to see it post. And it had been on my mind lately because I mentioned some of the shows earlier, but I also meant to mention that there's Disney Plus shows now, and I had watched WandaVision, I absolutely enjoyed it, and I'm about to finish The Falcon and the Winter Soldier when that last episode comes out, and so that made me think of the MCU even more. And this video, I feel like it was a good point to have it because there's so much under the belt as far as the MCU is concerned. And before we end things here, one more lesson. So, with those two shows, WandaVision and The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, you know that there's math all in there. Like, because we talked about how the story is constructed and how math is used in the production of it. And I would like to say, like, as someone who watched both of those shows, it's interesting to see how that affects me and how I have to use math to decide how I want to enjoy those shows, because each of those shows came out once a week. With WandaVision, if I'm not mistaken, there was 9 episodes, and with The Falcon and the Winter Soldier, there is going to be 6 total. And so, you look at that time, and it's like, okay, so each of these shows are coming out once a week, and I gotta see if I'm gonna have time to watch that. And I wanted to watch it all week, so I had to budget my time accordingly. And there's math and all of that. And then of course, there's Disney Plus and paying for that. Now, I did not pay for Disney Plus. Like my family has it, so I was like, I'm able to visit them and do that. And of course, there's math in getting to my parents, like from the time to the mode of transportation, because it's like I could, drive my car over there. I could also walk, and that would take me longer. But there's all sorts of things that come with that too. What my whole big thing is just that there's a lot of math everywhere. The MCU is no exception, and it can't exist without math. And math is everywhere, and it's not a bad thing. It's actually great, and it goes outside of the classroom. You are a natural mathematician. Yes, you watching this right now. And if you didn't know that yet, I hope you think about what I said. I hope you check out some of my other videos as well, because I have a lot of videos where I talk about why that is. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoyed this video, and it definitely went over what I wanted to go over, and at the same time, it seems about right. All right, that being said, I hope you enjoyed it. Professor Prime out.